There is a sound I have carried in my chest for 30 years. Not a battle sound. Not the sound of a horse going down, or a man I loved calling my name from somewhere he couldn't come back from. Those sounds I have too, and they are heavy, but they live in the heavy part of me. This one is different. This one I carry gently, the way you carry something that will break if you grip it. It is the sound of a latch, an iron latch, so deep into itself that when I pulled the door, it did not swing, it tore. Like something alive resisting. Like the door itself had taken on the intention of the man who had wired it shut, and was honoring that intention even after the man was gone. I remember the cold off those pine boards. Black with weather, the whole frame, swollen from years of snow, finding the gaps and freezing there, expanding, making itself at home where it was not wanted. I remember the smell that came out when the wood finally gave. Lamp oil, old wool, the faint, sweet rot of something that had been alive in there once and wasn't anymore, or nearly wasn't, because then, before my eyes had adjusted, a sound from the dark, humming, quiet, the kind of sound a person makes when they have been alone so long they have stopped knowing they are making it. Just the body keeping itself company. A fragment of melody, something I didn't know then. Something I would come to know the way I know my own breathing. She was humming the way a fire hums when it has burned down to coals. Not performing warmth, just still containing it. That is how I found her. I should tell you who I was first, because who I was is the only reason I was standing at that door. My name is not important in the way names usually are. You want to know if I was a great chief, if I had many horses, if the men under me were brave. I will tell you this. By the winter I broke that latch, I had been leading my band for 11 years. 11 years of trying to keep people alive on land that kept shrinking. The treaties were paper. The paper was promises. The promises were smoke. I had watched the smoke drift and the land go, and I had made choices I did not always like about how to survive inside them. That is the whole of my greatness. I kept people alive. Some winters that was everything. Some winters I am not sure it was enough. We were not at war that year. We were not at peace either. We existed in the space between, which is where my people had lived for a generation. Careful, watchful, moving along old paths that had become uncertain. The settlements were spreading into the river breaks. The soldiers came and went like weather. Some cold and punishing, some neutral, few almost fair, and you couldn't know which until you were already in them. There were men at the forts who wanted blood, and men who wanted paper, and a very few who wanted to be left alone, and that last group was the only one I ever had anything in common with. I had learned by then to tell them apart quickly, when to speak plainly and when to say the thing that would be heard. I was 41 years old. I had been married once, to a woman named Morning Frost, and she had died of the fever when my daughter was 3. My daughter's name was Bright Day. She was 12 that November, the November of the latch, and she was with her grandmother in winter camp while I rode out to check the draw. There were things about me by then that had set hard. The way a creek cuts a channel and then keeps going deeper in that same channel, because the channel is already there. I was patient in ways that cost me, negotiating from a position that kept narrowing and never showing what that narrowing felt like. I was quick in ways that were useful, reading the land, reading the intent behind a man's words before the words were finished. I had stopped expecting much from the world, not from bitterness exactly, more from the habit of accuracy. I had ridden out that morning to look at a draw where we sometimes yell sheltered horses in bad weather. It was November, the air already sharp enough to taste, the grass on the flats bent flat and gone pale. 2 of my younger men were with me. Turning elk and a boy we called Little Hawk for no reason anymore, except that his uncle had given him the name, and his uncle was gone. They were 20 years old, both of them. At 20, a man does not feel winter the same way. They were riding with their coats half open. I didn't say anything about it. I remembered being 20. The cold takes longer to reach you. The homestead came into sight around a bend in the creek. I knew the family. Harmon was the name. Thomas Harmon, wife, and they had a daughter, I thought. I had seen them at the trading post twice. Harmon was the kind of man who made himself small when I was near, and then I imagined, large when he returned to his own ground. I did not have a strong feeling about him, good or bad. Just noted him the way you note weather, something between a threat and a nuisance, closer to nuisance. The wagon was gone. The stock pen was empty. The front door of the house stood open. Not open, like someone had gone out and was coming back. Open like an argument. The wind moving it on its hinge back and forth, a slow, irregular knock against the frame that had the quality of something that had been going on for longer than you'd want. Little Hawk started to say something. I held up my hand. We sat there a while. Nothing. No smoke from the chimney. No dog. The whole place had a held breath quality, the way a place has when something happened there, and then the thing that happened concluded. And now it, just the aftermath, existing in the absence of anyone who remembered it. I got down. I know some men would not have. Some men would have seen that open door and the empty pen and the gone wagon, and would have read it as not their problem and turned their horse. I have thought about that. What the world looks like if you ride away from the things that are not yours to solve. Whether it would have been simpler, whether I have ever actually wanted simple. I walked to the house, looked inside. 3 rooms. A cold stove with ash still in it, fine gray ash that had been sitting long enough to compact. Tin plates still on the table, food dried on them, maybe a week old. A child's boot by the door. Just one, which is always strange, a single boot, the mate of it somewhere else in the world, both of them waiting to hear about each other. Harmon and his wife and whatever children they had were gone. Not in a violent way. The house was intact, nothing overturned, nothing broken, no blood, no sign of urgency. The kind of leaving you do when you have decided to leave. When you've been deciding for a while, and one day you decide. I almost turned around. I stood in that 3-room house with its cold stove, and its dried food, and the damp feeling of a place that has stopped being lived in, and I almost turned around. Then I heard it, faint as a thing can be and still be heard. From above, the humming. Shh. The attic was reached by a ladder nailed to the back wall of the house, just cleats. Pine boards tacked up at intervals, barely enough to grip. I have been in enough white men's houses to know that attics in this country were not meant for living. Storage, sometimes. A place for things that might be useful someday, which is another way of saying a place for things you couldn't decide about. There was a door. Small, maybe 4 feet square, set into the ceiling at an angle, hinged on the low side to swing out and down. And the latch. The latch was not just closed. It was wrapped twice with wire. Old baling wire, twisted tight and then twisted again. The kind of closing you do not do by accident or absent-mindedness. The kind of closing you do because you want a thing to stay closed, and you want it to stay closed even if someone else wants to open it. The wire was the whole message. The lock that wasn't a lock, but was something worse than a lock because it was improvised. It was something a man had done with what he had on hand, in the moment he made his decision. I stood on the top cleat and looked at that wire for what felt like a long time. I could still hear her, softer now. Maybe she had heard my boots on the cleats below her. Maybe the humming had gone inward and quieter, the way animals go quiet when they sense something approaching and are deciding what the approach means. A person does not wire a door from the outside for good reasons. There is no version of wired wire that resolves into a story I want to know. Every version of it is some kind of keeping in, and yet the sound was still coming from behind it, faint and continuous and alive. And I did not walk away. I had a knife. I worked the wire off. My hands were cold enough that it took longer than it should have. The wire had been on long enough that it had taken the shape of itself, grooved in, and it did not want to come loose. Turning Elk was in the doorway of the house below me, watching. I didn't look down at him. I just worked the wire until it came free and dropped it and set my hand to the latch. That is when it tore. That is the sound. The door swinging out and down, wrenching loose from its swollen frame, the wood splitting along the edge where weather had fused it, ceasing 15 winters of closed dark into the cold gray light of a November morning. I say 15 winters, meaning all the winters of her life that had been ceilinged and boxed in one way or another, not only the 9 months in the attic. But I did not know that yet. I only knew the dark and the cold pouring out of it, and the sound stopping. She was in the far corner, not cowering. I want to say that first, clearly, because it matters. She was not a woman who cowered. She was sitting with her back to the angled wall, her knees pulled up, her arms resting on her knees, and she looked deep at the light coming through the door, and then at me with the focused, assessing attention of someone who has had a long time to decide exactly how they will meet whatever comes next. Not fear. Inventory. She was taking me in the way a good traveler takes in new terrain. Cataloging. Not panicking. She was thin. Starved. There were provisions up there. I could see them arranged with a care that told its own story. Flour and salt pork and a jug of water and a chamber pot and a small lamp that was out of oil. Someone had been ensuring she did not die. Someone had thought it through. But thin the way you get when living is something you are doing on reduced rations. When the body has made its peace with not expecting much and has trimmed itself accordingly. Her hair was dark, down around her shoulders, unbrushed for longer than was comfortable. Her dress was gray wool, plain and practical, and she had a blanket around her that she'd woven herself. I could tell. Because it was the work of someone learning from the beginning. Uneven at the edges, the tension in the thread inconsistent, but it held together. It had kept her warm enough. She had made warmth out of what she had, which I noted. She looked at me. I looked at her. She said, in a voice that had not spoken aloud in some time, the edges rough with disuse, the way a path that goes unwalked grows over. "You're not Thomas." "No," I said. She let out a breath. Long and slow and quiet, the kind of breath that has been waiting in the body for a while, held back by the body's caution, and now it came out all the way, until there was nothing left of it. I asked if she could stand. She could, though not easily, the way a limb is when it has been in the same position too long, when the blood has gone to sleep and has to be woken, when the joints have forgotten their range. She pushed to her feet against the wall, and I steadied her at the elbow, and she did not pull away from my hand. That was the first thing she gave me. The simple, ordinary trust of a hand on an arm. No hesitation, no flinch. Sure. She had decided something already in those few seconds of looking, and the decision included accepting steadiness from a hand she didn't know. We got her down the ladder. Little Hawk was gone from the doorway. I found out later he'd gone to look for any sign of which way Harmon's wagon had headed, the direction of the ruts in the frost, whether they were fresh. Turning Elkin stood near the cold stove with an expression I had not seen on him before. He was trying to make his face do nothing. He was not managing. He sat at the table, where the dried food was still on the plates, and she looked at her hands. They were the hands of a woman who had been working at something, the palms calloused in a new way, the nails bitten down. She looked at them as if they were slightly unfamiliar, as if she was checking they were still there. I asked her name. "Clara Voss," she said. "Before Harmon it was Voss. I prefer Voss." I asked how long she had been in the attic. She thought about it. Not because she didn't know. She knew the number. I could see she knew it. But because she was deciding whether saying it aloud made it more real, or gave it less power. "Since late winter," she said. "Before the last thaw, that was 9 months. 9 months in a space maybe 8 feet at its widest, with an angled ceiling that made most of it impossible to stand upright in. 9 months of that humming. 9 months of flour and salt pork and water brought up. I would learn by Harmon's wife Margaret, brought it in silence, and did not meet Clara's eyes, which, I think, was its own kind of quiet suffering. The woman who could have opened the door and did not. I asked why. She said, "He didn't want me to leave." I will not tell you everything Thomas Harmon was, because I don't know all of it, and I don't fill in what I don't know. It is a bad habit, and I have tried to stay clear of it. What I know is this. Clara Voss had come to the territory as a mail-order arrangement, the same as a good many women did in those years, when the frontier had more men than it could balance. She had come from Ohio, which she described to me once as flat, in a way that makes the sky feel like it's watching you, like there's nowhere to be that isn't also in plain view of everything. She said she had thought the plains would feel the same, but they didn't. Plains felt different to her, she said, even from the wagon, that first morning, even not knowing what was ahead. The plains felt like possibility, the scale of them. The sense that there was room enough for a person to be someone. Then she arrived at Thomas Harmon's homestead and found a man smaller than his letters. A man who had described himself on paper as capable, steady, God-fearing, which are words that cost nothing. And in person was a man who needed to be the only thing in a woman's view, who mistook owning for caring, who when she tried to leave the first time, and then the second time, understood in his own terms that he was losing something and responded in the only terms he had. He put her in a box and kept her. She told me this in the house, before we left it, sitting at that table. Her voice was practical and dry, the voice of someone who has processed a thing past the point where they need to collapse over it. But I watched her jaw when she said the word Turk, attic. The way it tightened. The way the body holds onto what the voice is trying to release. I told her she was coming with us. She looked at me for a moment. That particular looking, the horizon-reading look, measuring. Then she said, "All right." She stood. She took nothing. Not even the blanket she had woven. There was nothing in that house she wanted to carry. Walking out of a place with empty hands, because there is nothing in it that is yours. Not one object in four walls that you chose or that someone chose for you with good intent. We went out into the cold. She tilted her face up. The sky was low and gray, the particular heavy gray of a November sky loaded with what was about to do. She looked at it for a moment, not with relief or with wonder, with a kind of steady recognition, like she was confirming something she had known, was there and was simply glad to affirm it. We rode north. I gave her my horse and walked alongside. Not because she couldn't have managed on one of the other horses. She could have, but the horse was mine, and she was coming to where I lived, and it seemed right. Turning Elk watched me do it. That expression again, trying to be nothing. She rode well. Not like someone who has ridden much, but like someone who would learn fast. You can tell the difference from the first few minutes. Her back was straight. Hands were soft on the reins already, feeling the animal instead of bracing against it. I noticed things about her as we rode. The way she breathed when we came out of the creek trees onto open ground. Through her nose, a long full pull, like checking the quality of something she'd been told about but needed to verify herself. The way her head came up on the flat ground, orienting, the way she looked at the horizon, not wary, not sentimental, just looking. Taking it in the way you take in something you intend to know well. I remember thinking, there she is. The woman who was in that attic. She is still in that body, the thin gray-dressed body on my horse. She is also already somewhere further out. Already heading. We made camp that night with my family's Z of my band wintering 6 miles north in a hollow where the wind broke against a limestone shelf. Crow, Feather Woman, and her husband Lame Bull. They had been with me since before I was chief, since I was just Red Hale's second son, who asked too many questions. They took Clara in without ceremony. Crow Feather Woman looked her over the way. She looked over horses, thorough, steady, taking her time. Then she nodded once and pointed at where she should sit. Clara sat. No performance of gratitude, no over-explaining herself. She sat and she watched what the women around her were doing, and she began quietly to help. Not as a show, she just had hands, and they were idle, and the work was in front of her. Not afraid. That was the thing I kept returning to in my own mind that night. 9 months in an attic, dragged out by a stranger who spoke a language that wasn't fully hers, and she was not afraid. Either of me, or of the camp, or of the dark, or of the morning that was coming. I had seen fear in a lot of forms by then. I knew what the absence of it looked like when it was genuine. It was genuine. She stayed. Not that winter only. Beyond it. I would like to tell you I knew from the first night that this was how it would go. That would make a cleaner story. But I am a man who tries to say true things. And the truth is that the first winter, I only knew she needed somewhere to be, and I had somewhere, and that her presence in the camp was uncomplicated, in ways I had not expected it to be. She learned Lakota faster than I expected, faster than most people learned anything. Not because she was performing willingness, but because she was genuinely interested in the grain of a thing, how words worked, what they were built from. She asked questions directly, the way children ask before they learn to be polite, and this startled some people and pleased others. She worked without anyone directing her. She figured out what needed doing and did it. That first winter I watched her, more than I understood why. She would sit outside on clear cold mornings and look at the sky for a long time, not praying, not thinking in the way that shows, just looking at it with that particular quality of attention, steady and full, like she was tending to it, like the sky required her looking in order to remain itself. I asked her once, late in February, the cold at its hardest, the sky that impossible deep blue that only comes with serious frost. I asked her what she was doing when she sat like that. She said, making sure it's still there. I didn't say anything else. I understood. I understood it the way you understand something that doesn't need to be explained further, because the explanation would only make it smaller. In the second winter, she asked me to teach her to track. She said it plainly. I was checking a snare line. We had come out together without planning it, which was a thing that had developed without either of us marking the exact day it became a habit. She came along when I went somewhere on foot, and I had stopped noticing the appearing and started just expecting her presence the way you expect the sound of the creek when you are near the I asked why she wanted to learn tracking. She said, because you know where things are, and I want to know where things are. We started the next morning. I showed her how to read frost, how the shadow a track throws at a low angle tells you more than the track itself, how the shape of a hoof print changes with the animal's weight distribution, what the bent grass means when it bends against the wind, how disturbance in snow that looks like nothing. Looks like something when you train your eye to the level of the ground, rather than above it. She was still when I was talking. Not the stillness of patience, which has some effort in it, the stillness of actual attention. When she was wrong, and she was wrong often, at first, she said so without deflection, and tried again. By spring, she was reading sign better than turning elk, which I took care not to tell him. There was a morning in May, the creek running full and brown with the snow melt, the cottonwoods along the bank just beginning to open. She tracked a mule deer doe for 3 miles on a hillside where the ground was partly rocky, and the sign was incomplete. Picked up the thread every time it went thin, and found where the deer had bedded the night before in a hollow under a pine blowdown. She crouched over the pressed grass, and the hair caught in the bark, and she identified from the way the hair lay, from the shape of the impression, that the deer was pregnant. She stood up, she looked at me, not for praise, for confirmation. To check if I'd seen what she'd seen, I said yes. She nodded once. Satisfied. She did not need me to tell her she was right. She could read what was in front of her. She wanted a witness. That is a different thing, and it matters. She wanted someone to have been there when she did it. Someone whose seeing made the doing more real. I was there. I saw it. I have been seeing things she does for 30 years. I should tell you about the song because the song runs through everything. She had been humming it in the attic. She hummed it often still, usually without knowing. The way something that has been used for survival becomes so deep in the body that it goes involuntary. A rising phrase, unhurried, and then a fall, and then a long-held note that went on just past where you expected it to stop. She hummed it in the mornings. She hummed it while she worked the snare line in winter. She hummed it under her breath when the camp was quiet and there was nothing urgent to do. And her hands were doing something small and close. Once, on a long ride back from a meeting with the fort, a meeting that had gone badly, and then, after considerable work from me, had gone less badly, and I was tired in the specific way that tired is when it is not about sleep. We rode the last miles in the dark, and she fell asleep against my shoulder. The motion of the horse, and the dark, and the familiar cold. She slept, and the humming came out of her small and barely there, and I rode and held her weight against my side, and listened to it, and did not move. I asked her what it was eventually, not on that ride. Later, by a fire, when the question felt like it fit, she was quiet for a moment, looking at the fire. Then, a song my mother used to sing. I don't know where it came from before her. It doesn't have words. Maybe it did once. And the words went away and only the shape stayed. She hummed a few bars and stopped. I hummed it in the attic every day. Because if I stopped, I thought if I stopped, the attic would become the whole world. The song was the thing that reminded me the world was bigger than four walls. That it kept going outside while I was in there. That I hadn't imagined it. I watched the fire. Then I said, I heard it before I opened the door. She turned her head and looked at me. Through the wood, I said. Before I knew what it was, something shifted in her face. Something small and irreversible. The way a thing shifts when it understands something it didn't understand before. She said quietly, "That's why you opened it." I said, "I don't know." Yes. She looked at the fire for a while longer. Then she leaned her shoulder against mine and did not say anything else. Neither did I. That was a night I remember the way I remember particular weathers, specifically, the temperature and the light and the exact quality of the stillness. The third winter is when I knew. It was a hard one in every direction. We lost 2 horses in a cold snap that came down without warning from the north, the temperature dropping 30 degrees in 6 hours in the way it does. Out here sometimes, sudden and final, and by the time we understood what was happening, there was nothing to be done. We lost old Two Clouds, who had been blind for 3 years and had been making his peace with going for 2 of them, and his peace did not make it easier to watch. Peace rarely does from the outside. And there was the business with Coulter's fence. Coulter was a settler who had pushed his fence line in the fall, while we were in the north pasture. Another 2 miles into ground we used in late autumn for the horse herd. It was not Coulter's ground. It was not anyone's ground in the way that settlers meant ground. It was land that had been ours in the way air is yours when you breathe it. And then the treaty had made it complicated. And then the treaty had been reinterpreted, and then Coulter had put up posts and wire, and now it was complicated in a new way. It took 2 weeks at the fort to resolve. I rode there with 2 men and a translator, and I sat in a room with an officer who meant well, and another officer who did not, and I spoke carefully, 2 weeks about things that should not have needed speaking carefully about. At the end of those 2 weeks I had preserved what I went there to preserve, which was the right to use the autumn pasture, but I had not recovered the 2 miles. I had been outmaneuvered on the 2 miles. I knew going in that I would probably be outmaneuvered on the 2 miles. It was the price of keeping the larger ground. But knowing what something will cost does not make paying it easier. I came back on a night that was full dark by 4 in the afternoon, the sky low and loaded, cold that had gone past feeling and become just a fact about the air. I was tired the way you are tired when tired no longer has anything to do with how much you slept. Clara was at the fire. She was finishing a pair of winter moccasins for Crow Feather Woman's youngest, the little boy who wore through everything they put on his feet. She finished the stitch she was working on before she looked up. That was a thing about her. She finished what she was doing before she gave her attention to the next thing. It was a small thing, and it was also not small. She looked at me. Her eyes did what they always did. She took me in fully. The way she looked at the sky, the way she read a track. She didn't ask if the ride was bad. She could see the ride. She said, "Did it go as badly as your face says?" I sat down near the fire. The warmth came at me slowly, looking at the layers of cold that had settled in over the 2 weeks. I said, "They took 18 miles of the South Draw." She was quiet. She set down the moccasin on her knee. "But it's contained," I said. "It doesn't go further." I made sure of that much. She reached across and put her hand on the back of my hand. Not tenderness, exactly. Not comfort in the soft way. Something more like, "I know what you carried, I see it. You carried it, and you came back with the most important part intact, and I see that too." Hand was saying that, and her hand was also just her hand on mine, warm from the work, the calluses I knew. And I turned my hand over and held hers. We stayed like that for a long time. The fire burned down. Outside, the snow was starting in earnest, ticking against the lodge cover, beginning to accumulate. She said, eventually, "You went in every direction they pushed. For 11 years. And you held the line. You kept them to paper instead of something worse. You're still holding," I said. "Sometimes I wonder if holding is enough," she said. "It has to be. You made sure there are people still here to hold it." A pause. "That's not a small thing. Don't call it a small thing." I didn't say anything. She said, "I know you don't want to be thanked. That's not what I'm doing. I'm just telling you what I see. You come back from 2 weeks of that, and your eyes are steady. You still have your own judgment intact. That's what your people need. Not 18 miles more of draw, you." I looked at the fire. "You're the door they go through," she said. Not knowing, she was saying back to me something I would spend years saying to myself about her. "You're what they have between them and everything that wants to reduce them to nothing." I knew then. I suppose I had been knowing for longer, and was only that night admitting it fully. I knew that this woman had become, without my noting the exact moment of the becoming, the person whose word I trusted most in the world. That is a considerable thing. For a chief, who, by the nature of the work, must be careful about whose counsel he trusts, who must stay clear-eyed about what people want from him and what they're leaving out. To trust one person's perception that completely is not thing. It is in fact the most private thing there is, and her hand was still in mine, and those were not separate things. I asked her to stay. Early. In the spring, the snow going, and the first real warmth lifting the whole world and the camp in that released mood that comes when a bad winter ends. Not celebration, just the feeling of breathing out after a long time of breathing shallow. I asked her away from the camp. We had ridden north to a place I had been coming to since I was a boy, a shelf of limestone, up on the north ridge, that caught the afternoon sun and looked out over a long bend in the river. The cottonwoods below just going green, the plain beyond them. And then the blue distance where the sky came all the way down to the horizon, and you could see weather 2 days out, and the curve of the earth if you let yourself see it. I had not brought anyone to place before. I told her what I wanted to tell her. Not elegantly. I don't do things elegantly. I told her what I understood about her, what she was, her presence, had meant to me, and what I thought it meant to my daughter. Nothing in particular, but had begun sitting beside her with the particular quality of leaning that children do with people they are attached to. What I was asking, which was not nothing, and which I thought she deserved to hear in plain language, rather than implied. She looked out at the river for a while. Then she looked at me. Straight at me. The full attention, she said. "I've been staying." I said, "I know. I'm asking you to know that I know. That I see it. That I choose it the same way." She was quiet again. The wind came up the face of the rock and moved her hair. She reached up and tucked it back without looking away from me. She said, "You opened a door. Yes, and I walked out of it. Yes, and I walked into yours, I said. Yes, she said. Then I'm in yours. I've been in yours. Unless you're asking me to leave, which it doesn't sound like you are. I'm not asking you to leave. Well, she said. That's settled. She looked back out at the river. That small smile she has. Not the social one, not the performed one. The other one. Cert. The one that lives deeper in her face and surfaces when something is genuinely right. We sat on the warm limestone for another hour, and we didn't say much, and we didn't need to. I need to tell you what the band made of her. It was not simple, and I will not pretend it was simple. My people had spent a generation watching what white settlement meant in practice. They had watched the game go, and the land go, and the agreements unmake themselves. They had buried people. They had adapted in ways that cost them things they did not choose to give. And into this Clara came. White, from the world that had cost us, unable to unbe what she was regardless of how much she learned our language, or how well she read sign, or how quietly she sat with the dying. Teed. There were people in the band who were fair to her, and careful, and fair and careful is not the same as warmth. And she understood the difference. She did not ask for warmth she hadn't earned. She didn't perform anything. She showed up every day and did what was in front of her. There were hard moments, one I remember. A man named Stans Crooked, who had lost a son at a river crossing 3 years before that, a crossing that had been made necessary by a detachment of soldiers who had been where the band needed to be. Stans Crooked looked at Clara one evening across the fire and said something I will not repeat, something that was more about his grief than about her. But that landed on her anyway. She said nothing in that moment. She looked at him. She let him see that she had heard it and had not collapsed under it. Then she went on with what she was doing. Later, when he was not there, she asked me about his son. I told her what I knew. She listened without trying to resolve anything. She's just asked what the boy's name had been, and listened when I told her. That was all. But she asked for the name. That mattered, though I could not have said precisely why. The children were what changed the temperature first, the way children always do. They moved toward things without the scaffolding of adult caution, without the accumulated logic of good reason to hold back. They found her within weeks of her first winter, and they found her the way children find things, by going directly at them. She played with them. She taught them hand games she'd learned as a girl in Ohio. Simple things with no rules. And she let them teach her games in return, and she was bad at their games, with an honesty that made them laugh. She let them sit in her lap when she was working. She told them her mother's song in the evenings when the fire was low. Feather Woman came to me near the end of the second winter. She said, "That one," I said. "Yes." She said, "Don't be an idiot about the timing." I said, "I would try not to be." She said that was all she could ask, and that it was not much, but it would have to do. My daughter Bright Day was 14 when Clara came, 15, by the time the spring thaw changed things. I had not known what to expect. I had told Bright Day plainly what had happened. A woman had been locked in an attic by a man who had gone, and I had brought her back with us, and she would stay with the camp through the winter and maybe beyond. Bright Day had listened with the particular face she had inherited from her mother, a face that took things in and did not immediately produce a verdict. She watched Clara for a full season. Quietly, the way I watch things. The first time Bright Day let Clara braid her hair, not asked for it, offered it, sitting down behind Clara, and simply presenting her hair. I was to the fire and I watched it happen, and I looked down at the fire, because I recognized what it meant. And because some things a man watches privately, without letting his face say what it says, so that the thing can happen on its own, without the weight of his observation on it. By spring my daughter called her by her name. That was enough. That was all it needed to be. We were together for 31 years. I am an old man telling you this. The world has changed in ways I could not have imagined from that limestone shelf. Changes I would have called lies if someone had described them. Then, the land going on paper in ways that made the fence arguments of the old days look small. The agreements that replaced the old agreements, the schools, the pressure on the language, the way my grandchildren move through a world that my grandfather would not have recognized as the same world. I stopped fighting some of those changes when fighting them was costing more than it was preserving. Some I am still fighting and will be when I am gone. I am still sorting out which calls were right. Clara has been beside me through all of it. She is sitting now, as I tell you this, in the lodge we built on the last piece of land I have kept whole, a place in the river bend where the cottonwoods are older than I am and stand, on three sides, like they have been standing since before anyone's grandfather could say when. She is doing what she always does in the evenings, something with her hand while her mind is somewhere else. She got her eyes from her mother, those eyes that go distant without warning, that find the far line of things when the near things are settled. She does not know I am watching her right now. Or maybe she does, and she is used to it after 30 years. She is humming. She hums it still. Mother's song, the one without words or with words too old to find. She hums it the way she always has. The way a fire hums when it has burned. Down to coals, not performing warmth, just containing it. The rising phrase and the fall, and the long-held note. I heard it through pine boards, before I ever saw her face. I have been hearing it for 30 years. There is something I need to say about what I gave her and what she gave me, because the accounting matters. I gave her the open sky, is the thing the title says, and the thing that is true. I broke a wire on a door. I gave her a horse and walked beside it. I gave her ground to stand on, where no one would put her in a box. I gave her work that was worth doing, and a daughter who eventually braided her hair and a fire that was hers as much as mine. I gave her a place where her hands made sense. The things she built and mended and grew were still there in the morning. I was her door. That is a true thing. Here is the true thing that sits beside it. She gave me back something I hadn't known I'd let go. I had been a chief for 11 years, and I had done the work of a chief, which is the work of always having a face that people can trust, of carrying the worry in a way that doesn't show as worry, of being the steady thing when the steady thing is needed. I had been doing it long enough that I could no longer easily find the line between what I was performing and what I was. A man who leads a long time and carries a long time can lose that line. I had lost some of it. Clara saw me, not the chief. Not the performance of steadiness that got me through the fort negotiations and kept the band together through hard winters. She saw the man under that. The man who stood at the door of a dead homestead and heard humming and could not walk away. She saw that man and thought he was worth seeing. When I was tired, she said so plainly. When I was right, she said so. When I was wrong, and I was wrong, I am wrong. All men are wrong in specific and various ways. She said that too, quietly without campaign, just. I think you've got that wrong, and here is why, and I will let you think about it. She was not always right when she thought I was wrong, but she was always honest. And honesty from someone who has no reason to flatter you, and no fear of your displeasure is a gift that is rarer than, people say. She had been in a box for 9 months, and she came out of it without bitterness, which is not a small thing. She came out of it, and she stayed out of it by choosing every day to look at the sky rather than the walls. I don't know if I could have done that. I believe I could not. There is something in her that I do not have, and that I have admired every day for 30 years. A stubbornness of soul that goes deeper than will. It was not Thomas Harmon's doing. He tried to make a thing in her that would stay small. He failed entirely. The last thing I will tell you is a morning. Last summer. I am in my 70s now. The winters reach deeper than they did. Cold lives in my bones, the way water lives in limestone. Last summer there was a morning when I woke before first light and could not sleep. Again and came outside. The river was loud. It had been a wet spring, the river still running high and brown with it. and you could hear it from the lodge, a low, continuous argument with its own banks, the sound that the river makes when it has more water than it knows what to do with. The cottonwoods were full dark still, just the shapes of them against the sky. She was already outside. She was standing at the edge of the trees, where they thin and the ground drops to the waterline, standing with her face up, looking at the sky in the way she has always looked at it. That attending look, that checking look, tree, the one that started in the attic and has never fully stopped. The sky at that hour, before light is properly light, is a color I have never heard anyone name right. Not dark blue, not gray. It is the color between dark and the beginning of color, the color the sky is when it knows the light is coming, but has not committed to it yet. The color of something being decided. She was standing in it with her face up, and she was humming. Her mother's song. The one she hummed in the attic, when she did not know anyone could hear. The one that kept going when she stopped knowing the world was bigger than four walls. I stood at the edge of the lodge, and I watched her and I did not call out. I thought, that is what she has. That is what Thomas Harmon could not take away from her, wired door and all. The song stayed, the face that goes up toward the sky and stays there until it has what it needs. That stayed. The stubbornness of soul, refusal to let the walls become the world. All that stayed. And what I gave her was the standing outside of it. That is what I gave her, not the song. She had the song. She kept the song alive in the dark by herself, which is one of the bravest things I know. I gave her the open ground, the sky above it, the morning to stand in, with the cottonwoods around her, and the river loud in the background, and nowhere to be that had walls she didn't choose. I was the door. A door she walked through into 31 years of sky. The light came up. Came clear out of the dark one by one, the way they do, finding themselves in the growing light. The river kept its argument. She was still there, still humming, her face still up. She turned around and saw me standing at the lodge. That tilt of her head, the one that asks a question without asking it. I walked to her. I put my arm around her shoulders, and she leaned her weight into my side, and we stood there. The way we have stood 1,000 times, while the sky found its color, while the day found out what it was going to be. She stopped humming. She said quietly, into the morning. "You're up early," I said. "Didn't want to miss it." She looked at the sky once more, that small smile. Not the performed one. The real one, the one that lives deep and comes up when something is genuinely right. "Neither did I," she said. We stood there until the full light came. The cottonwoods were gold in it. The river kept going.